In this video, I'm going to try to find out how good Rapidash is in Pokemon Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum Nuzlocke. With perhaps the overabundance of insanely cool fire-type designs that have come out up to this point in Pokemon's history, it can be pretty easy to forget about this line, especially with Arcanine and Ninetales existing within the same generation. But while both Ponyta and Rapidash have seemed a bit underwhelming in the earlier titles, the impact of the physical special split really made this line feel completely different, and I'm really excited to talk about it. As always, we are covering everything from where to catch one, stats, moves, matchups, and more. I'll be coming at this analysis primarily from a hardcore Nuzlocking background, but everything I say should apply to regular Nuzlocks and casual playthroughs as well, unless I say otherwise. And at the end of the video, I'll give Rapidash a letter grade for its overall performance in Pokemon Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, so be sure to stick around for that. Let's get started. The franchise's favorite fire foal can be found in a variety of locations at a very respectable encounter rate, and most of these areas are traversed within the first half of your adventure. This right here is one of the biggest upgrades that Ponyta could have received, and it's one of the biggest differences between Gen 4 and the games that came before it. You can finally obtain Ponyta far before Gym number 7, or in some cases, the post-game. And it just feels refreshing to see Pokemon like this get a chance to show the world how useful they can actually be in a full playthrough. But this is just scratching the surface. There are quite a few reasons why these new early encounter locations are so important, and this line would receive a number of other much needed improvements in the Sinnoh region. Ah yes, fire. A very unique typing despite being part of the classic starter trio. And that's made even more apparent by the fact that Ponyta and Rapidash are some of the only ones that exist in these games, especially Diamond and Pearl. Why they only included 2 fire type lines, I'll never understand, but this is yet another aspect that helps boost their value a bit. Unlike in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, fire types do actually have a purpose in these games, although it is still fairly niche. Fire is another middle-of-the-road type in my opinion, but for completely different reasons when compared to others around that same level, such as the normal type for example. Normal types are just not really good or bad at anything, whereas fire is going to be either incredible or awful, depending on where you are in your playthrough. On one hand, you're going to have a rough time against the abundance of water, ground, and rock type moves, and Pokemon in general, all of which are fairly common types to run into. On the other hand though, some of the toughest obstacles in the entire game can only be more easily traversed with a fast fire type, like Rapidash. Overall, it might seem like Ponyta and Rapidash possess a very polarizing typing for Sinnoh, perhaps making them a bit awkward to carry around with you for larger chunks of your playthrough. But the moments in which they can shine the brightest are going to be some of the most challenging obstacles to overcome. Moving on to stats now, and this is where Ponyta's early encounter status really starts to become valuable. Well, kinda. Yeah, we're gonna continue that theme of polarization here as well. Unlike most first stage Pokemon, especially in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, Ponyta's stat total and distribution are well above the average for an early to mid-game Pokemon. I mean, just compared to some of the other Pokemon that you can receive around the same locations. Machop, Chingling, and Bronzor definitely come to mind, all of which will be much weaker than Ponyta until they evolve, which in some cases, like Bronzor, will be quite a bit later in the game. However, speaking of late evolutions, Rapidash is perhaps one of the most guilty. Yes, it's true that Ponyta can cause a lot of damage around the earlier stages of the game, but once you're about halfway through your playthrough, you'll start to run into some problems. Problems that won't be totally resolved until level 40. Don't get me wrong, it's not like Ponyta is completely unusable during the midsection of the game, it's just going to be a lot harder to utilize due to its very poor physical bulk. You'll have to pick your battles very carefully for a while. But hey, now back on the better side of things, once you do get Rapidash, it's pretty solid. Great spread, much bulkier, and while level 40 is pretty late, it comes just in time for some of those difficult obstacles I keep hinting at in this video. Don't worry, we'll cover the matchups in a little bit. Now, if I may continue my streak of great versus awful, I'd like to quickly go over their abilities. Useless and fantastic. Take your pick, unless you're doing a Nuzlocke, and in that case, I will send my thoughts and prayers to all of you unlucky souls that got a runaway Rapidash. Why? I don't get it. I mean, okay, it's a fast Pokemon, I guess, and horses can be kind of skittish around people and animals, maybe? Is that the theme here? But from a mechanical perspective, what I just said should invalidate this ability's very existence. They're already fast. They don't need this to run away from Pokemon. But on the bright side, Ponyta and Rapidash have a chance to get Flash Fire instead, which is awesome. This can be used to pivot in certain fights for sure, but it could also be used as a setup for a Pokemon that's already very fast and can hit pretty hard. Really fun ability overall, and it certainly adds to this line's uniqueness for this set of games. As we start to talk about the movesets at this point, now is probably a good time to mention the version differences. Ponyta is a bit more frustrating to use in Diamond and Pearl specifically, as you're going to be dealing with Ember and either Stomp or Return for quite a long time, unless you plan on farming up enough coins to grab Flamethrower from the Veil Store or Game Corner, which I would highly recommend, by the way. But in Platinum, we see some much needed improvements to the earlier moves in the Learn set. Ember now comes at level 10, which is nice, but more importantly, Flame Wheel has been added to the move pool at level 15, when it previously had just been an egg move. This is a huge deal for Ponyta's early to mid game viability, and it makes it so much more enjoyable to use as well. And then you'll of course eventually get Flare Blitz, which in my opinion is awesome and terrifying at the same time. Very difficult to use, but also very powerful when used correctly. Unfortunately, as with most Pokemon games, coverage options become a very important part of the team building process as you edge closer and closer to the later stages of your playthrough. And, well, we've got Iron Tail. If you are playing with a Sun team, Rapidash is a decent Solar Beam user, but that's a pretty niche scenario if I'm being honest. And while Bounce seems like a bit of a meme on paper, Flying is a great coverage type to have, and a 30% chance to paralyze isn't a bad bonus. Could be used for stalling as well if that strategy is necessary. And as far as Diamond and Pearl goes, that's it. Oh, wait. You have Strength, I guess. And in Platinum, you do have a few options available via Heart Scale, but they're not the best. Poison Jab isn't super useful on a non-poison type Pokemon, as poison in general isn't a very useful offensive type. And Mega Horn can be great, honestly, but just like the very few other coverage options that Rapidash has at its disposal, it comes with a big accuracy hit. Overall, when it comes to move pool selection, Rapidash is a one-trick pony, sporting some powerful stab options from both the physical and special sides, but falling a bit short in the coverage department. Now let's get into the good stuff. It's matchup time. As we've mentioned throughout the analysis so far, one of Ponyta's biggest strengths in these games is how early you can obtain one. The Fire Horse will perform very well against the general overworld as a whole for the first half of your adventure, since you'll be faster almost all of the time, and the damage potential is well above the average as well for this stage. However, random trainers will start to become more difficult to handle soon after you obtain the HM for Surf, I'd say. Bringing Ponyta or Rapidash through Iron Island and even Fuego Ironworks won't yield much results. In fact, it's probably just too risky with all the rock ground and other general physical based threats that you'll encounter. It will eventually get much better though as you eventually approach the snowy routes. Rapidash will thoroughly enjoy carving out a scorched path on your way to Snow Point City. And after that point, matchups are fairly neutral across the rest of Sinnoh, just avoid the water route between Sunyshore City and Victory Road, and you'll be just fine. Moving on to our final section of the video, let's talk about the boss fights, and we'll start with the bad this time. While you can obtain Ponyta before Gym number 1 in Platinum, it's obviously not a great idea to fight Rock with fire, making it impossible to really do anything meaningful against Rourke. That's honestly okay though, there are plenty of other solutions for Rourke anyway, so not too many points taken away there I suppose. The next and probably most unfortunate scenario for Ponyta is against Maylene and her fighting types. I say this because not only are all of her Pokemon based primarily on physical attacks, which goes against Ponyta's weaker defense stat, but they are all sporting moves that are super effective against our Fire Horse. Even worse than that though is that 2 of those moves are Rock Tomb, which is also going to lower our speed. And since Meditite and Machoke are always going to be slower, it's pretty much a guarantee that they'll be spamming that instead of literally anything else. With some mild speed EV investment, you could outspeed Lucario. But unfortunately, not even Flame Wheel will be a one-hit KO, no matter what combination of nature and attack IV/EV setup you have. And Bone Rush will just completely obliterate you in response. Moving on to Crasher Wake. Moving on to the Pokemon League, actually. I know we're really flying forward with this one now, but Rapidash will not be able to help much on either Bertha, Flint, even Cynthia to a certain extent. Not being great against Bertha and Flint is not so much of a big deal, as those two are going to be dealt with a Surf Sweeper or two anyway. But it is unfortunate how badly Rapidash stacks up against most of Cynthia's Pokemon. Gastrodon, Lucario, Milotic, Garchomp, and even Togekiss will pretty much all have their way with you, which leaves only Roserade and Spiritomb as potential matchups. Ponyta and Rapidash in general match up pretty poorly against your rival as well, regardless of what starter you choose. You can use Ponyta to deal with the Grottle before it becomes a Torterra, which is nice. You could also use them against Rosalia/Roserade, of course, and even Heracross if you're careful. But by the time Berry starts to become an actual threat, you're dealing with the fast and powerful Buizel line. Prinplup and Empoleon are obviously another issue, and Berry's birds will now have Intimidate, nerfing your Ponyta and Rapidash's physical presence. I guess it might be closer to a 50-50 for your rival when I really think about it more. It's just switching into stuff like Heracross just seems a bit precarious to me. Now that we've covered most of the bad matchups, which to my surprise there really aren't that many to go over, let's talk about the good and the neutral. Starting with the good, you're actually going to get some pretty decent value out of the 2 early Galactic admin fights. I'm not saying your Ponyta can take on Perugly or Skuntank all on its own, but you can definitely remove their Zubat leads pretty painlessly. And when their aces do come in, Ponyta's excellent early game stats will allow you to use at least 1 or 2 Growls or Tail Whips relatively safely. I really like having both of those options at your disposal, depending on how your team is currently constructed. Next is Gardenia, and there's not much to say here. Fire beats grass, it's probably not going to be a clean sweep like you might have with a Crobat or Monferno, but Ponyta will still have an obvious advantage in this one. Jumping ahead to badge number 6, and Rapidash will absolutely crush both Magneton and Steelix with Flamethrower. Bastiodon is unfortunately out of the question, as Stone Edge is just too nasty, but there are plenty of other Pokemon out there that can take out Byron's ace without any issues. And now we've got 2 big ones in Gym Leader Candace and Team Galactic's Cyrus. Candace is quite the pain in the ass with her extremely irritating Snowcloak setup on Frostlass, but Rapidash will stack up nicely against everything here except for her Piloswine perhaps. You will either need a heavy speed EV investment or an agility setup to get yourself faster than that Frostlass, but if you can pull that off, Rapidash is capable of making Candace look like child's play. Big points for that one. With the Cyrus fights is a similar situation. Ponyta and Rapidash will stack up neutrally for the most part against most of these reoccurring fights, but the biggest threat is that Weavile, which has historically been one of the most dangerous obstacles for any Gen 4 Nuzlocke. Again, extra speed will be necessary in order to pull this off cleanly, but I'd say that's another big W for our fire friend. And Rapidash will of course be fantastic against Aaron and his bug types in the Pokemon League, but that's not saying too much I guess, since you'll be very over-leveled against him. And every other boss fight I hadn't mentioned up until this point is going to be a fairly neutral affair. Bring your Ponyta/Rapidash if you want, they'll do just fine. It is also worth noting that Volkner does have a few fire-type attacks hooked into some of his Pokemon that could be used to give your Rapidash a very nice setup, as long as you have Flash Fire, of course. Whew. That was a lot to go over, but I guess that's what happens when you have a Pokemon that can be obtained super early, but also not be considered just an early game Pokemon at the same time. There are some rough spots in there, but clearly Ponyta and Rapidash have what it takes to be useful throughout the entirety of your adventure. Overall, I think I can comfortably say that both Ponyta and Rapidash are filled with some of the highest of highs and some of the most deeply embedded flaws at the same time. From the powerful early game stats and the most perfect matchups into some of the most dangerous obstacles in the game, to the painfully late evolution and the absolutely pitiful coverage options. But with that being said though, there's definitely something special here with the Generation 4 games specifically. Rapidash, as perhaps unexciting as it can seem on paper, fills a role pull in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum that many others wish they could. I'm going to give Rapidash a B+ for Pokemon Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. When I really look at it, honestly, Fire is just a good type for Sinnoh, making those lack of coverage options far less noticeable. And apart from Cynthia, the matchups that this line does struggle with are almost all dealt with fairly easily by other commonly obtained Pokemon. And with that, this video is now over. If you like these types of reviews, be sure to check out all the other ones I've done so far in this playlist here. And let me know which Pokemon you'd like to see me do next in the comments below. In the meantime, as always, please like the video if you liked it, and subscribe for more content like this. That's it from me. I'll see you next time.